1, 2, 3, 4.
One, two, one, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. You're listening to the Online Time Fame Podcast. I'm your host, JD. Today's show is about the title of the show. Let's say it in that way. The title is The Collapse of the Traditional Music Industry and the Mainstream Hip Hop Industry Said Nothing. So, when you look at the music industry today and you look at streaming and the explosion of urban podcasting, because podcasting has been going on for more than 2 decades now, and now we see just an influx of a lot of urban artists, a lot of former athletes, just an explosion. And we mentioned it before, how these major companies like FanDuel, DraftKings, and there's another one that they're gambling corporations, and they step in and sponsor these podcasters, but the underlying message is vice, gambling. Something that anyone who has a small amount of common sense would know. The house always wins. The odds are in favor of the house, of the corporation that sponsors the gambling, because they're going to design the odds in their own favor. If someone comes over to your house and wants to gamble, there's a possibility that you may know some things to do or how to present the game in a way that will give you an advantage. It's called the home court advantage, so to speak. So it's almost difficult to say, but yes, mainstream hip hop artists did little to prevent streaming from being the primary model in the music business. Now, I am no music industry insider, expert, not even a novice. I know very little except maybe what I've read here and there. But there is a podcaster by the name of, there's a channel, and it's on all major streaming platforms, called Dougie Diamonds TV. He's an industry insider. He's interviewed people for over 2 decades, and he's not, and he's still a young man, meaning he was a child in the music industry. So that's why he's been in the music industry for so long. And, his interviews are very informative with hands-on experience of people he knew. The Notorious B.I.G. used to record some of his first songs at Dougie Diamonds TV studios. So Little Kim as well, from the early, we're talking the 1990s. As I said, everyone was young back then, as far as just barely out of their high school years and when entering the music business. So the point is, hip hop was always counterculture, or what would you call non-mainstream. Hip hop was, I say counterculture, but it was, let's say it was underground, just like what rock and roll was. In the beginning, hip hop wasn't even a part of the music industry. The music industry didn't look at rap music as it was a viable genre of music. The only reason why record companies respected rap music is because the music was selling. The sales of an artist back in 1986, let's say Run DMC, they were selling just as much as Gladys Knight and the Pips. They were selling just as much as someone like Rick James. They were selling 500,000 copies of their albums on upwards, beginning at 500,000, moving their way up to million copies sold, platinum albums, easily. And they weren't the only ones. You're talking from everyone from, not everyone, but many artists, over a dozen artists from 1985 through 1990, easily beyond 90, but just right there, You had the Fat Boys from Brooklyn, multi-platinum selling artists at the same, like upward of the same level as Run DMC. The Fat Boys used to host they used to cross promote and they would be at the circus, Ringling Brothers Circus, featuring the Fat Boys, because all the children loved the Fat Boys. They were they were a very nationally recognized group, really into international, just from the movie, the 1985 movie Crush Groove, starring Run DMC and the Fat Boys and Curtis Blow, LL Cool J and the such. All of those groups were at least gold selling artists and upward to platinum selling artists. So the point is, there were many more. There was many other viable acts that were selling 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, eventually reaching gold. So the point is, it was still outside the system. It was based on mom and pop record stores. It wasn't included. They didn't have hip hop in the beginning. The music industry, Billboard magazine, they weren't rated in the beginning. Their sales were not counted consistently, because just every night, that's not what the show is today. But if you look and do research on it, the hip hop industry and hip hop artists weren't included in mainstream music. Like, I'll just say one other thing. In the beginning, when they had like the Grammy Awards, even though hip hop artists were selling as much as everyone else, the music industry, the Grammy Awards executives said it was fine to give the awards to hip hop for best hip hop album, but they weren't allowed to accept their awards on camera. And I think that's what it was. But they definitely were not allowed to perform. So there's plenty of books with this in it, and plenty of articles and interviews of people who talk about it to know the intricacies and the details. But the point is, being that hip hop came from such a underground, unaccepted part of music and society and culture, we look 20 years forward to now, where all these artists are comfortably on labels or on major management company rosters, and they're quiet as a lamb. When they come onto these new podcasts that they've been starting, they're only coming for propaganda purposes, to keep their names in circulating, and all they are is almost like boat cruise level acts. They go and sing their songs for people who grew up in that era, and you got to keep the rent paid so they could get on the road. And there's people who look at it, but in the grand scheme of what hip hop really was, and it was like a balanced expression of culture. Like, for instance, like I'll even say to say that when the group Public Enemy, Chuck D, Flavor Flav, Professor Griff, when they spoke out about discrimination policies and discrimination legislation in Arizona, the rules in Arizona, I don't remember the details. I can't say something I was reading, but they were addressing national situations regularly. Chuck D was considered an older artist, although he was only 27 at the time. That was considered older for most artists who were newly signed hip hop artists when Public Enemy got signed back in like 1986 maybe, for their first singles. So the point is, they stood up, they were conscious people, and they, meaning aware. He had his bachelor's degree from, if I'm correct, Adelphi University in Long Island, New York. So, he was coming into the business different. And, he was considered the elder statesman, and as a young individual still yet, because that 27 is obviously young. But he spoke on issues, and he spoke on topics, and he communicated as an adult, which was able, he was also more or less influential on other upcoming artists, helping and teaching them. So the point is, now you got all these people who want to speak and do these broadcasts. The only thing they can talk about is what happened in 1994 on tour or something very superficial in a serious time. The time of today is just like the times of 1970, 1961, 68, 1971. This era of the black, this era we're in now, economically, global tension, fighter jets flying over airspace all over the world. There's tense times. War is going on right now. Russia, Ukraine. So it's serious, and these people don't have nothing to say. They just have superficial high school level conversation. They don't have nothing where they can contribute and even say, well, we don't have to worry about that. But what can we do for our own communities? Nothing. They're just on the air trying to get a check, trying to keep their bills paid, keep their middle class households up, which is fine. But it's still exploitation because they ain't taking no risks for the people. They've been making economics for 20 years. And all they can do is just try to maintain the status quo of what they have, and they're extensions and arms now of corporations. The corporations have taken something that they didn't like, the people who were on the outside, and they have brought them on the inside with the perception that they're still outsiders. Hip-hop ain't outsiders no more. That's rap music. And that's commercial rap at that. There is underground, but it's not the ones that we see on these newly emerging podcasts. There's this nostalgia, and really, and propaganda. Other artists who don't want to be in the media sent these people, told them, yeah, get a podcast, and you can talk about this to boost us in the media. But ain't nothing being said, and I'll say why. Not to just go, because as we said before, when you look at the purpose of what we're doing here, online time fame is, we're in an online era. This ain't traditional media. This ain't NBC, ABC, and CBS, when those were the main television stations where people had to come through. They had to come through that filter in order to be approved if they had the talent, to be able to perform, on a national scale. They had to have those hit songs. It had to be, recognized on the radio, and from the radio, someone would eventually end up being able to be on TV. This is before cable. We talk about the 1950s, up until through the 50s, through the 60s, through the 1970s, through the 80s almost. Because at least with the 80s, we started to come into cable television, and then they had they had channels like HBO, where you could get a small cable channel. They did exist then, and one could just watch cable, but it was a cable used to mean a few channels, except for the suburban in certain cities. But nationally, cable wasn't wired, especially for like New York City, until the 80s. So every area wasn't wired. Of course, some neighborhoods had it, but it was just a common thing by the 1990, 93, 94, starting to come in like that. 95, then almost everywhere had cable. So the point is, these individuals, they're talking in the times we live in, they don't have anything to contribute. Now, when we talk about the origins of cable, I did do a basic search because I didn't want to just guess, but I kind of had an idea. And this was a Wikipedia, pardon for that, because I didn't get to look at 3 different sources but for the information that makes in cross-reference, so to speak. But it said that the true beginnings of podcasting date back to 2003. There was a software engineer by the name of Dave Winer, Winer. He developed the RSS feed, an audio RSS feed, and the New York Times used it, and they had a host. They had a journalist at the New York Times, a reporter, who Christopher Lydon, Lydon. He had the RSS feed for his blog, and then so obviously he talked on that. So he had audio content. He had an audio content blog for interviews there, and that's one of the first places. And then you started getting these companies that became podcasts, because the funny thing was, where the podcast came from was the invention of the MP3 file. So the MP3 file was originally developed back in like 1991. But then around in the 90s, late 90s, coming into the 2000s, people found out how to use an MP3 file, and they knew how to convert a WAV file, which was a CD, or take any other form of music and feed it into like a vinyl. They eventually learned how to do the same thing with vinyl recordings and convert that file into a MP3 file. And once they got, because it was size, the MP3 file was much smaller than a WAV file. And once they did that, people start uploading music online. So when you talk about music and MP3 files, it takes us back to what? The iPod. The iPod was in 2001. First you had, iTunes, the platform where MP3 music had come from, because before that it was some other pirate underground sites. But when the official uploading of music and licensing began, it was one of the first was iTunes in January of 2001, and then they came with the iPod in November of 2001. So there, from that point on, CDs, compact discs, and vinyl were on the decline. In MP3 files, in the standardization of charging for MP3 files was regular, 99 cents per single, and that's how people were still buying albums, but they were buying downloads, and you could download it to your device. In record CD in CDs, and the records had already slowed. At least DJs and people still use records, and CDs had exploded. Compact discs, and it became highly popular. So as we move into the 2000s, again, we saw the setup. We saw the setup where artists were no longer making what they used to make. They weren't making the same level of economics like they used to. So the next phase we saw was streaming. And then, so streaming is a recent phenomenon. But that did change everything. But this is another thing why we talked about, let's go back for a second, and when we talked about why these artists from 20 years ago who don't really make new music, but they said, well, we ain't got new records, because they know those streaming platform prices are not paying, because streaming, it was an experiment, and the experimentation of how to determine how many streams are equal to sales, and that was a big mistake from major record of companies, artists. It was the artists, really, not just the company, where artists didn't say, well, let me make sure I'm still selling stuff, merch, CDs and albums and vinyl on my website independently. See, they never jumped, and that was a common thing in 2000. By 2002, it was a big thing to have, for one, to get a webmaster and hire somebody and host their own website and figure out a way to sell their own downloads. People were doing it. Independent artists were exploring those avenues. But because these major label artists that we uphold and revere, they're just employees. Even though it's not even a record company hires an artist as a independent contractor, so to speak. They don't get benefits. They don't get health insurance, but because they don't really work there, but they're limited by contract in what they can do. They're telling them, nah, don't try to do your own thing. Lay low while you need a little money. Here, we can give you an advance. And they give them a little cash, and dudes just take that cash advance and became quiet. Because if they did speak up, that would be a problem. So we see who was censored. Nobody said nothing. They might say something here and there. Oh, man, this streaming is garbage. But they wasn't proactive in terms of developing the community and showing independent artists what to do. And I've heard that be said, that, people never show anybody else how to succeed what to watch out for. These artists was paid not to do that. Everybody knows that. So now as they resurface in this so-called podcast realm, because they've heard about a few people who make a lot. They heard about Joe Rogan and how much he earns, and they see these young teenagers and young adults, what they're making in the streaming world. And they say, well, I still got my bills. And if they don't want to go on tour, they say, I can just sit in the house and talk. The problem is they don't know nothing. They can rhyme. Very good at sitting down and writing some lyrics. But as far as all that drug rap and all of that, that's irrelevant. They wasn't supposed to be talking about that anyway, because those who was in the streets didn't need no commercial. They didn't need nobody talking about how thorough they was, because that's talking. And there's people that's really out there. They don't need no attention. All street figures know that them dudes who rapping about what they did, or I remember it was a record. Won't even say who it is. People can figure it out. And it mentioned a location uptown in New York City, said a street. And this individual mentioned they used to get their drugs from that street. Do you know, riding down that street after that record came out around that time, one would see a squad car sitting in the middle of the street, like the median, that grass part of the street, where it's on the left, in the middle between the north and south traffic lanes. They would be sitting there as though they was watching that spot, but everybody knew that was the spot for 20 years. But when this individual, it was just the neighborhood. Whatever, every street was the spot. But for that individual to put the street on blast was not only negative toward the street people, the so-called alleged drug dealers. It was negative toward law enforcement, as implying that law enforcement couldn't contain or stop or prevent drugs from going on. But that was an outsider who no longer was a part of the street, trying to show that they had some connection, but they was out of touch, because really they was telling. That's informing. That was ratting. It was dry snitching, as they would call it. And not, so anyway, when you get back to the music and these people who, they had record deals, they don't offer nothing of substance. So they just want to talk old stories, and that's good. We like old stories. But as far as current relevance of what's going on today, in which correlates to what the age of these people, nah, man, they talking like 22-year-olds, and they 45 and 50. But they don't have that level of knowledge. They don't read books. They don't self-educate themselves, and they don't advocate literacy, because their conversation is not that. Because some of the most vicious, dangerous, notorious, infamous people you'll ever meet don't talk like that in public, except in the circles in which they originate. In public, they ain't talking no wild stuff. Growing up as a kid, we didn't know who these people were in our neighborhoods, our family members, or whatnot. We heard rumors, but they never projected none of that. So anyway, when you talk about these rappers and as they rise up, that's why you see us right here. And this is a complete different conversation, because as we said, there's three factors that go into communication on a public scale. The first one we said in the previous episode, one of the first episodes of this season 2 that we call it, because we did some broadcasting a couple years ago, but now we have a better idea of what to present to help people. There's three factors that are important. Small-mindedness refers to talking to people. Now, social commentary, critiques, and observations is good. Talking about people, even gossip, it has a place, because it's entertainment and people want to hear about. That's what celebrities are for. They're public figures that people can focus on, for some downtime to, just to entertain. And so that is a topic of discussion. And so I'm not saying it's irrelevant. It's just it's a very basic level, but everybody don't want to be serious all the time. So but it's small-mindedness is people. Average-mindedness is events. It can be current events. But great mindedness is talking about ideas and solutions to problems. And that's what you'll never see from these so-called rappers and all of these entertainers that are converting and becoming podcasters. They don't have nothing to contribute of substance to people no more. Probably since 90, overall on a large scale since 94. Everything has been materialism and ignorance. Getting high, drugs, and not even rock and roll, because that was rebellion. But everybody who listened to rock and roll wasn't living that lifestyle. It was just rebellion and whatever they were pursuing. These dudes is in a cash grab situation, trying to become podcasters, and they the furthest thing from a journalist, so they can only be on the small-minded level. And there's a lot of people that want to hear that. But as far as the beacons of communication, which once represented MCing, the one with the knowledge, who told the story, who delivered the folk tale of what to watch out for in life. I guess in that one movie, The Mariachi, where the Antonio Banderas, there was a movie back in probably 96. It was a remake, but in that culture, there's the one who plays the guitar, and then they sing these stories similar to the blues. They have storytellers, obviously, and so that's what MCs were seen as. But they've become like what they have at Ferris University, the Jim Crow Museum, and it has coons, sellouts. And those coons and sellouts were images that were created by Caucasians to demean and devalue so-called black Americans. And so now that's what these current rappers are. They're almost like a buffoonish individual because they can't switch up and even show you nothing serious. Your most clownish comedian in the 1970s, I'm going to say Richard Pryor. He can talk all that crazy stuff, N-word this and N-word that, but once in a while, and quite often, he would say something profound and conscious. Not even once in a while, because he was very conscious. He used to, Richard Pryor was friends with Black Panther Party members. He knew Huey P. Newton, chairman and co-founder of the Black Panther Party in 1966. He knew him back from them days in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, Richard Pryor. So, I'm not saying he wasn't intelligent, but what I'm saying is it was the characterizations and the street stuff, which, gathered in the drug use, got the most attention. But every once in a while, he would go 100% serious, and people would say, oh yeah, that's Richard, that's different. His life was different, in the category of his own. But the point is, these rap people, they don't have nothing. So they're flooding the airways, and they're going to leave. Not because they're being planted and put there, of course, because they heard about some contracts of people like the Joe Budden podcast. They heard about what he was earning, and they're like, oh shoot, I got to get on there, for economic reasons, for brand marketing, and for damage control, because they can't just have people talking about them, but they ain't got nothing to say, nothing of substance, because like I said, small-minded, average-minded, great-minded, they ain't got that. They're always going to be on that small scale. And as I said, that's entertainment. When you talk about critique, social commentary, gossip, rumors, sometimes what is gossip, the truth comes out about later. So I'm not saying they don't have a place to put a moral judgment on it at all. But as far as them being some thorough dudes, never. They was never that thorough. See, this is where a lot of people in hip-hop made a mistake. They complain about how they got backstabbed by people and how when people didn't look out once they got on. But if they really knew who they was putting on, they wouldn't have never put them on in the first place, because they wasn't never thorough from before you put them on. So for them to turn around and stab you, erase rap, erase being a criminal, a thug, let's say, a hooligan or a hoodlum, a neighborhood tough, as they call it, neighborhood tough. Remove them. Who would they be in the street? Because even amongst top street figures, they would pick certain thugs with potential to follow directions and to use their brain, and they would bring them from the street corner to an organized higher level of criminality. Rap dudes ain't them dudes. They just not. They talk that talk, but they ain't them, because those people are still there right now. And when you ask some real dudes, I ain't talking about not no bums on the corner with a colored rag in their pocket that's robbing the grandmother on her way home. Not somebody you got to watch out for because they're going to shoot your nephew in front of the corner store. Not them clowns. I'm talking about thorough people. I mean, that's a whole nother subject. So we don't want to, talk negative about nobody like that. So instead of, without going into depth of what that means and what a street individual, what the streets are and how they operate. That ain't even a common conversation that's supposed to be spoken on. But what I'm saying is these, people you got to worry about in your own neighborhood, but these same people ain't got no conversation for people who speak in public negatively about black Americans. They ain't got nothing to say, but they got the microphone in their hand all the time, but they ain't got no depth. There's some who do, but most don't. And once people get a certain amount of cash, they're like a lion in the zoo. As long as you keep them behind that cage, they ain't gonna do nothing. A zoo lion ain't the same as a jungle lion. They two different entities. That lion know what time the food comes out. That zoo lion knows what times he eat. Yeah, he'll still go off. He's still a lion. But he ain't the same as that lion that's out in the wild. Even a reserve, when you look at the television programs and you see the animals at the natural reserves in Africa, even those animals know when not to mess up. Because if one of those reserve, when they had a tourist there, if one of those reserve animals attacks somebody, they get rid of that one. And the other ones know, man, you see that? The other lions will talk to that one and say, you saw Jonathan got transferred. Yeah, I ain't seen him. What happened? Well, after he attacked that tourist, next thing you know, they came and got him. So animals even know, all right, as long as I don't mess with these people, the food is going to keep appearing and they're going to keep feeding us. There's food out there and they can attack as well. They can attack. I mean, it's a natural ecosystem, as they would say, but they also get fed too. So the point is, these rappers are like zoo animals. They ain't gonna do nothing ruthless except to their own people. They ain't gonna say nothing profound or controversial because they know they'll get shut down. They won't be able to tour, and they'll be told. They get conversations with high level people, executives. Hey man, you're doing good. How's everything? And when you say, oh, I'm hurting a little bit, they say, well, we're gonna see if we can get you a show, and they feed them. So that ain't what rap was. Rap dude be right back in the neighborhood, maybe not having no money, and saying, oh, at least I sold this much. I ain't spent my money. I paid for my house, and I'm good. That's what it used to be. But now, chasing the so-called, mainstream ideal of music, they're not all that. They're not at that high scale. So anyway, this is another funny thing. When you're talking about the impact that these artists have, I bring it back to this just to have a solid example. When we go to Tupac Shakur's "Keep Your Head Up," and that was that was the second solo studio album from Tupac. That album was called Strictly For My NIGGAZ, and that was an acronym because each letter in NI has, I forget what it stood for. Never ignorant, getting goals accomplished, or something like that. That was what it stood for. But the point is, yeah, that was Keep Your Head Up. I think the single was released October 28th, 1993. I think that means when the radio plays it as a radio in rotation record. But the album, just because the album drops, and that was February 16th, 1993, that don't mean it's going to be on the radio. It may, whatever other single was released at that time when the album came out, might get played more. And then if they decide, let's release another single, that's when Keep Your Head Up was released. So the thing with Keep Your Head Up, it was a call to action. And Tupac didn't always go along with the program. So although he started being prominent he would still reach back to his core fan base, which was inner city people. So when you look at most artists are incapable of that level of depth anyway. As soon as they say something controversial, they immediately apologize. Oh, I was just talking. That's just the record. They promoting drugs, liquor, and detrimental behavior, but that's about it. They may be able to do different, but they won't. So in the song "Keep Your Head Up," dedicated to the black woman, Tupac said, quote, "So will the real men get up? I know you fed up, ladies, but keep your head up," unquote. But the thing is, don't get me wrong, there is a level of, I won't call it pandering, where, I want the sisters to buy this record, so I'm going to be nice to them. It's an element of that involved, but it's also something that should be said, even if it was just something to be said, as a positive message. But beyond that, Pac, in the same record, when he's talking about the conditions of inner cities and how the treatment of black women, he said, quote, "And don't blame me. I was given this world. I didn't make it," unquote. So that's keep your head up. So what it was saying was the up and coming generation, we just inherited a certain situation of how society operates. So when women say men do this, they ain't talking about so-called black men, because they've never been in patriarchal positions of power. Never. And then so what women like bell hooks, scholars in the 1970s started saying was, well, if y'all was in position, y'all would do exactly what the European male are doing. And that was bad to put that on us. And that caused the whole problem of where we are today. We never were in a position. If a woman got, challenged in the home, that wasn't a system, a nationalized system, an institutional system of patriarchy. It never existed for the so-called black man. But anyway, the point is, for Pac to even have a song of that magnitude, it was seen as a call to action. So if he says, "Will the real man get up?" he's talking to anybody who heard that record. From in the almost 30 years since that record came out. That's been 30 years. 1993. So, the point is, that's a time-tested lyric. So what we did was our people set up an organization called Empowerment for the People, answering that call, what Tupac was saying. For free, we showing people, especially sisters, how to start their own businesses, how to get up off that stripper pole, how not to be, have a job, go get a McDonald's job, do whatever have to be done, but also set up that business. So empowermenttothepeople.com, and in the search engine, it'll explain it, empowermenttothepeople.org. And my people, they put out a book to go with it, to give some more detailed information. It's like an ebook for $3. But the point is, go to that website, they explain fully what to do for free. You ain't even charging. So, when you're talking about giving back, some of these artists have hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal. They don't do nothing. Of course, they have nonprofit organizations, but that money is already allocated based on an inner system that they're a part of, made to look like it's making a difference. But what's changed? Out of all the millions, of course, it's 50 kids went to college. We talking about changing whole communities. So when we talk about empowermenttothepeople.org, we change it nationally with no cash. We just let the people be educated. This what you do. When you see somebody who wants to be the first move you make for self-improvement, we ain't telling you how you can make no bunch of cash, but get your health right. Start eating better. Eat the best you can. Exercise. Do push-ups, calisthenics. Start out. You ain't got to go to jail to get in shape, to do pull-ups and push-ups. Squeeze it in between your 15 minutes. Squeeze that time in between your 15-minute break at work. Go do something. Walk, like you see how females always walk on their lunch break. Yeah, put in more work. Start from there if you can't get to the gym. If you can't get to the gym, your membership is going to be under $20, your number of gyms. But my point is, transform yourself. As people see that if you are overweight and you say, "I'm going to lose this 40 pounds, people going to listen to you when you tell them what they should look to. Go see a doctor and say, hey, doc, can I pursue an exercise regimen? Get that clearance. Get a checkup first and then go do it. But my point is, this leads to other things. Your health, your better health is going to give you more energy, more determination, more motivation, more aspiration, so you can make moves. It ain't like you going to get clients off the top and be balling out of control. That's secondary, but it's on the way. You're going to get other things. It's like $1 billion industry, so it ain't only you just being somewhere on Instagram. But it's better than, they was pushing stripper culture. These shows like Love and Hip Hop and all of that, that was all detrimental. The more you fight on those shows, the more you get to stay on the show. That's all negative. So they did that to people in the inner city for 20 years. A bunch of people wasn't even black Americans, but they had them acting like it. And these was the plants, and promoting all kinds of alternatives that wasn't real. Look at these people's backgrounds who did it. Yeah, people from here did it too. But when you see the overseas conditions of where people came from, it ain't hard to see how they sell out when they get to the States. And I ain't even blaming them. If you came from some of what these conditions, it's, everybody don't have the fortitude to avoid that. And then they looking at what their families got to deal with. So people just took the wrong choice. Because when you look at certain artists, they had like superior ability, but they were instructed. I'm going to need, drugs and negativity sell. You ain't talking no positivity. That was changed. But anyway, that's why a lot of these so-called, we'll get into that another time, but that's why these podcasters can't win. Because they ain't got no Tupac level song that inspired an organization. It's just like what used to happen during the Black Power movement that don't cost no economics. These individuals go train. There's only 3 key components that somebody needs to do in order to start a business. They got to get them a phone, get them an email, and get a social media presence, and make sure all of that under the same umbrella. Same name for all your accounts. Other people said it before they get the accounts and how to set it up. But then that's the beginning of your company. So you're going to learn. You're going to have to study. And you're going to become a consultant. You might be a fitness influencer. But the number one thing is you got to be in shape. When somebody see you, they got to know you work out. They don't tell them I work out. They should see you with your jacket off. Or, even in your clothes. If you want to get technical, they should say, God damn, you look like you work out. What's up? Oh, I do a little something. You know what I'm saying? And they say, you a trainer? That's the only way you going to break into the science off the street. Be so thorough, or not to say you just walking around just diesel like that, but I'm just saying, be the individual, be the trainer. Don't say you teach it. Set the example. So, and that'll lead to other doors opening as you study. And that's what our people need to get back to health, staying away from poison. People think they got funds to get high and smoke weed, and then they need to borrow some cash to go get some gas for their car to go to work or to get a subway card. But I'm like, you don't get to get high. You just use your subway card money on them drugs you bought. You can't afford to get high. You can't afford to drink. It's easy for you because you ain't got no spare cash. So just get down with the exercise. It's going to make you mentally and physically stronger. So anyway, the point is, and there's more to it than that. That's why my people put the book out about that, for that. And it's linked on it's only $3 ebook. But the information, the basic is already on the site for free anyway. So that's what I'm saying. You see these so-called rappers with these podcasts, they incapable of building a program like that. Yeah, they might be selling something, and this ain't selling nothing. Yeah, of course, it's a book there for sale. But as I said, it ain't even an option where it have to be purchased. Go to the website, get the basic information there, and then look up the information for yourself. But we have to make sure my people had to put out a book with it to show that it wasn't nothing just being talked about. It's action, applied action. And that's why, and then it goes into detail. But the information can be found for no cost. So when you got these so-called $100 million MCs and former rappers and music executive, we cheer because they make another deal. That deal ain't made no change on the nation. Meaning the whole USA. It is getting worse. You just need more and more and more economics just to have a basic life. And since them people got enough reserve cash to have a house, inflation don't touch them. They don't even remember what that was. It just make them squeeze us harder. That's why you see these little MCs who from the past that's irrelevant trying to do a podcast. They gotta pay the rent, but they done entered the wrong arena because they don't know anything. It ain't how many degrees you got from college. How many books did you read, and how much information do you have that you can share that will benefit others? I'll give that, because that's what New York was. New York was an intellectual city. New York, and then it became California, where all of the scholars from, there's one way to look at it, because it wasn't only that, but the scholars that came from Europe after World War II, a lot of them fled Europe, came to the States in the 40s, and it was just an influx of international ideas and thought. For even scientists, social scientists, and stuff had already existed here too. I'm not saying that, but it just New York became a hotbed of intellectual thought. You can talk about the Harlem Renaissance and Langston Hughes and all of the people in Uptown, James Baldwin, all of them too, up in Harlem. But it didn't only mean Harlem. You could go to any borough in New York City, and it was a bunch of intellectuals. It was a bunch of self-taught people that made moves and changed their communities. Brooklyn, Queens, New York City, the Bronx. You just had brothers and sisters that was on that. So that's a whole nother story. So I'm saying you won't even get a fraction of that from these dudes nowadays. You just won't. They was just the reflection of the drug era of the 80s and 90s. They wasn't them dudes, because them dudes was probably going to jail or tried to become executives or something. But the dudes you hear rhyming, they wasn't the dudes they say they was, because we checked. We checked. And when it come to the streets is like, it has a yellow pages. And you ain't got to look at no book. You on the street corner and you like, what's up with these people, man? Then you already knew. Nah, fiction. Because they ain't supposed to be talking anyway. That's what makes it fiction. They talking too much. So they nullify themselves. Ain't nothing to be said. But anyway, that's another story on all of that. But the point is, ain't nothing of benefit, of value. People trying to leverage their past careers, and they don't have nothing that's introspective and life-changing that they can give to the people that don't cost nothing, because their heart don't have that no more. They got cold hearts because they've been made puppets and pawns and tools of higher powers. And I ain't saying it's a bad thing. It's just that, they don't, the Europeans just know the one that's in front of them tap dancing. They don't say, well, man, I don't tap dance, but I can make more for y'all than he making. And then y'all mind, I want to do something for where I live at. Them dudes ain't even got the heart to do that. They doing strategic moves. When they give up some cash, it's strategic for a further move they want to make to be more greedy. They ain't doing nothing. These dudes are saying they Muslims. And they selling liquor. They drinking. They doing liquor commercials. See, they selling gambling. But they Muslims, or they conscious. And if you a street dude, it's not a victimless crime. You taking advantage of folks. You taking advantage of the weak. When these dudes went to jail and they was selling drugs, crack, everybody knew they was going to jail. So if you was smart, you just didn't get high. You knew them, hey, what's up? And you ain't get in their way. And you was around, they knew who you knew who they knew, and you was in the street. But you was like, man, y'all going, and matter of fact, go one step further. When the drug era came to an end, around 88, 89, 90, law enforcement put out a message. We on our way. But a lot of dudes was spending so much time flashing and buying stuff, they was in the hole. They couldn't quit. Because a lot of dudes quit selling drugs because everybody knew the police was coming. Oh, it's over. 89, no more coke like that. So anybody who still kept hustling after 89 and 90, they was on their way to jail and they didn't have enough cash to stop. Because the smart people diversified. Well, I'm going to get me a store. I'm going to do this. And they disappeared. So you don't see them in no interview. So all these dudes doing all these interviews, they don't have nothing for the children that's beneficial, because that's a non-discussable topic. It's street stuff. But we saying it to just let the listener know. Those who talk, what was that great movie? Do the Right Thing. Spike Lee. And I say great, because when the law enforcement rolled up and asked Ossie Davis's character, they called him the mayor. They said, hey, come here, law enforcement. 2 uniformed police officers rolled up. What happened over here? And he said, Ossie Davis' character said, those who tell don't know, and those who know don't tell. So that's what these dudes is. They blasting them all, talking all this stuff, even in records. I had to check in with some people one time, because that was their neighborhood, about something, because I can't speak on it if you don't know the people, because whatever environment that is, that's for them to handle. And they don't listen to no rapper. That was like listening to a circus clown, to a street dude. And I ain't talking about a criminal, just a conscious, smart individual. It's music, but they entertainers. And these dudes started putting people's names in records, saying their names. And they like, yeah, that's dry snitching. That wasn't fly. Dudes was in interviews back in the 90s talking about, I was the first dude to say dude's real name. He was saying that like it was cool. Evidently, you was a child. You was a mental child. Mentally, you was immature. You thought that was fly? When you know people, you better not say who they are on no goddamn podcast. You better not, because you going to see them and they go. I know people who, when they were making certain media, I ain't even going to say what it was, they immediately got stepped to by thorough dudes who was in the street at the moment that they was making these clown media projects, because law enforcement be watching. So these dudes jump up and be saying, I know this one, I know that one. Man, you it's just like that movie Jackie Brown. When it's a movie from 1996, if I'm correct. Jackie Brown starring what's her name? Pam Grier. When it was Samuel Jackson, and the legendary Samuel Jackson, and also the legendary Robert De Niro. When Robert De Niro's character made a mistake in Jackie Brown, Samuel Jackson's character said, what happened, Lewis, man? What happened? You was beautiful. Meaning you fell off. You backwards. That's what these rap dudes is. And that's what these former street dudes be getting on these podcasts, saying dudes' names and explaining crime. And I know him and he used to do this. I know I'm speaking for a fact. These people don't want you to say their name. I can make 2, man. And we gonna get into that too. That's a whole nother podcast, a whole nother show. But don't worry. Because these dudes is out, lost their mind, posting people's photos without their family wanting that to be shown. They don't know these people. If you in the streets and you ain't on that big mouth stuff, you know what you know. And these is clowns trying to capitalize and make money off people because they don't have it. So obviously they desperate to show relevance by saying people's name. I know this one. That's a sucker move. That's a sucker move. I thought you was thorough. What happened back in the day? Cause man, that was, man. One more on a lighter note. Let's get out of that energy. But as we said, peace to anybody that wants to be in media, but strive to do better. Strive to elevate. Don't be a repeater of small-minded information. So, our apologies even for mentioning certain stuff, because that ain't where it's going. We don't want to be known. That's why this is online time fame. People that got famous online. It's like when they used to say hammer time on that record. Can't touch this. Well, this is online time fame that these people are enjoying. It ain't traditional television time. Back when it was television, TV time, it ain't that. It's online time fame. That's what they got. But it's easier to acquire. Everyone has a voice if they would like to have it. But everybody shouldn't be talking the stuff they be talking. They need to regulate. We did say on the previous show, use of the N-word in public forums where Caucasians are around is out of order. It's negative and it is ignorant. You ain't supposed to be even curse in front of older people. That's how it used to be. That's why we didn't even know who these so-called street dudes was, because the ones who was the real ones never made no noise like that. You had some big mouth wild dudes who was really those dudes, but there was always some dudes who didn't say that much. And we didn't know who. We didn't know what they were as children. But they didn't broadcast. They probably bought everybody some candy or something, and we didn't know the magnitude of who these dudes were. So that was the tradition. You kept the children innocent. You showed respect. That's why Caucasians, and we're not even blaming Caucasians and being negative when we mention it, because we learn and we move forward. And those who do say negative stuff about so-called black Americans, they're ignorant. They don't know no better. If they were in a real debate about history, Caucasians would lose easy. Because half of the facts they say when they strive to demean black Americans, American descendants of slavery, those who have been through the fire, as chronicled at the Jim Crow Museum in Big Rapids, Michigan, the largest Jim Crow museum in the world. Go there and see. But so we ain't mad in that way. We ain't upset. We ain't trying to rehash and relive the atrocities performed, because it still happens. But the point is, people don't know the history. So they out here using the N-word negatively, like it's throwing it around like it's a frisbee. And that's not what it's supposed to be. So nobody told them. Once people start having economics, a clown having a bunch of cash is seen as being right. Or he got the most cash, so he must be right. No, he just a clown with money. And New York always knew that. That changed around 92, 93. 1992, 93, it started being the clown with money was right. Because before that, a New York dude would check you. I don't care. You know what they would say? I don't care how much money you got. That's what they used to say. As the ones in the background would sit there looking. Like, damn, he must know, since he's showing and proving. It don't matter how much you got. A clown is a clown. And dudes would say that to anybody. So then they picked dudes who would isolate themselves, be a clown in their own Hollywood way, which hip-hop was adamantly against. Hip-hop was never fraudulent. It spoke the truth. That's why when you look at the early Run DMC lyricism, and I say lyricism because of the potency and power of the words. See, they weren't sellouts. Never been for sale. Took a test to become an MC and didn't fail. That's how they talk. Don't do crimes. Don't drop dimes. That was Run DMC's. What was that? Sucker MCs and Rockbox. So when you go back to those days in '83, the lyrics was different. And it was reasons behind the songs. It wasn't the most lyrical of all songs, but the message, the structure, and the production was different at a rock and roll level. But that's a whole nother conversation, and I'm not an expert in that. I just know a few things and read a couple books. But, yeah. But it was like Run DMC wasn't, they was different. So, so anyway, when we talk about these new people that want a podcast, they don't know nothing. They don't have it. They there for a reason, and they was told to be there. So anyway, the only final thing what we was meaning to say was it was a joke that when we was a joke from every time you ask a brother if they know how to do something that they know they don't know how to do. You know how to rap, but you don't know how to conduct an interview or narrate a show or host a show where it's something of substance of based on a standard. You can have your own individual style, but these dudes ain't got no style. Somebody just made them a figurehead. Hey, you gonna get on here and do this. And they may have some charisma, being that they were performers at one time. They spoke before, but it's still, clown activity, basic. They ask a dude, you know how to do this? Yeah, I know how to do that. They don't. They didn't study like one would. They don't know the ethics of journalism. They know none of that. But because they're plants and just placed in positions, plants and people placed in positions became the thing. And you ask them, hey man, you think you can host the Olympics? Yeah, I can do that. It sounds like some of that talk from them old movies. We gonna be doing this about that time there, man. It sounds completely ignorant to put on the world stage. Now, one can talk street talk, supposedly called slang, which has its time and place. But these dudes, you got a bunch of dudes who ain't intelligent, presenting themselves in public, and then around the world, they see us in that light of that individual because it ain't enough of variety of the smart ones, the wild ones, the ignorant ones. No, it's just ignorant. So they ask them, do you know how to do this? Yeah, I know how to do it.
Do you know karate?
No, but I'm a fast learner. I can learn how to chop me a mother.
That's how these dudes sound, like some martial artist who never throws a kick. They just making noise, and people put them in position because ain't nobody else saying nothing that can be heard. One final thought. As we mentioned, one of the pioneers of podcasting as we know it when it comes to hip hop, because even before podcasting, people were doing the VHS tapes, and they were the street tapes, and then it was the street CDs, the mixtapes, and then it became the street DVDs. So people, that was really a transition, just like if you was on radio, it was a transition. So when you look at who was doing podcasts early, and then who was some of the first people on the platform, that is Doggy Diamonds TV. And the funny thing with Doggy Diamonds TV, and that's on all major platforms, the thing with them is the people who get in the business couldn't manipulate that show. They couldn't manipulate what he says, so that's why he never became, he's supposed to be right. What you see when you see the Joe Budden podcast, if it was somebody with a moral conscience, it would be Doggy Diamonds TV. But because he can't be swayed, he can't be pursued, you can't stick three random people who he don't, who I won't say who, in his organization, and then they just all eat off him, because most of these dudes is figureheads. They seem like they own something, but they just the head of it. Because if a Caucasian came and started certain businesses, they would say that's racism or that's exploitation. But you stick these token Negroes there and make it look like they balling out of control when they the figurehead and they not running it, and they got a hidden partner in the back who got them as being the front man. That's all they are. Doggy Diamonds TV ain't no front people. You can't get him to compromise his morals like that. He just not gonna do it. That's a whole trait of a real New York dude. They not gonna sell out. They not to say people are difficult and can't be worked with, but they not gonna be cooning and tap dancing the way people will push people to do. These other dudes is silent. They, it's sad. You seen people come from the projects eating peanut butter sandwiches for breakfast. I get it. So I'm not even dissing them. But when you look at where they, some of these people, but some people came from that and they'll never sell out. So I can't say it like that. But the ones who are some manipulated people, I get it. We ain't saying it like they can change. That's who they are. And that's why they're in the positions they're in. Because they play the game. But, but they taking L's too. Meaning moral L's. But yeah, so anyway. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with some more shows. And this wasn't impromptu because we did take a couple notes. But apologies, we still want to get in the swing and get in motion where we can have sharp shows and maybe have, everything just on point clicking. But some basic information can get to you real quick, and we did that, and we won't just be improvising and claiming we know how to do something we don't. If you see it, we're doing it and we're being it. So anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll just say peace.